Hey, welcome to my channel. Today we're actually going to discuss Blender hair particle systems and all the little nuances that go into a hair system and how you can create virtually any hair system that you can imagine. So let's start right here at the top. When you make a brand new particle system and you switch it over to hair, you're first presented with this emission tab. And this emission tab is the basic information. It is saying, hey, I need to know some stuff from you. What number of particles do we have to begin with? And these are your actual particles, not your children. So you have to make sure you understand that if you have 1,000 follicles of hair, Blender's going to calculate 1,000 pieces of hair. You can change the seed, and that will just change the distribution ever so slightly, but keeping the same inputs you used just to get a different result. This is just random seed. Hair length. This is exactly what it seems to be. This is how long is the hair. In this case, our hair is 4 meters tall. And the segments is how much each one of these particles is divided by. Now, something to keep in mind, this number doesn't change with how long your hair is. So if I have a hair length of 4, it's still going to divide this hair length for bending purposes, right? As you either sculpt it or use hair dynamics, it's going to maneuver this hair with only, basically think of this like subdivisions, right? With only 5 levels of detail. Source, this just tells you, hey, where's everything mapped, right? Currently it's mapped to the faces, but you can also change to map to the vertices, and now you see all of my hair is coming out of each vertex. One thing you'll notice though is it looks like there's only 8 here. It's actually not true. There is 1,000 still. Don't get it twisted, right? But there is 1,000, but there's just multiples overlapping each one. I like to keep it to faces, but you know, there might be a reason why you want to use vertices. Generally, I click this Use Modifier Stack button. What this button does is it just refers to the object's modifier properties and says, hey, look above it and just see what's up there. Make sure you're taking all that information into account when you're doing your calculations. That's mostly what you need to know from the emission tab. We'll close that up. So that's, again, emission, your default properties. If I drop down hair dynamics here, it's disabled, but hair dynamics does what it says. It says, all right, if I hit play on this system, we're going to start calculating this hair. So I hit play. If I check that and I hit play, the hair will account for gravity and wind and all these other things that are in dynamics. Render tab and viewport display tab. These both are pretty much the same thing, except one is saying, it just says, hey, what does my hair system look like in the viewport? And what does it look like in the render? You see this kind of thing a lot in Blender. This is similar to when you have a subdivision surface modifier on, and you have how many levels in the viewport and how many levels in the render, right? I can set these strand steps here in the viewport to be 2, or it goes up to 7 to max out. Likewise, in the render tab, you can choose, how detailed is your path when you render it out, and also what material is your hair. Okay, so let's talk about children here for a second. Well, that sounded like a very serious conversation. Darling, I think it's time we talk about the children. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I never think about simple here. Like, I just always skip this over because, and I'm probably wrong about this. Someone probably definitely knows more about this than I do. And there's a reason to use simple, I'm sure. It's still here. I like using interpolated because I think it gives me a more realistic result. And I have all these options here that, you still get with simple, but I like interpolated. Display amount and render amount. This is saying, how many do I want to see here in the viewport for playback purposes, right? I don't need to have 100 particles of hair in the display amount because sometimes that might just bog down my scene, and 10 might be enough to get by. And by the way, this is how many children per follicle of hair you have. This is a basic equation, right? To know how many hair follicles you're going to have, it's really just, this is how many original hair particles you have. You have 1,000 in the number, and each one of those is going to have children, right? And how many children? Well, right here. You're going to display 10 children. So in the viewport right now, we're looking at 10 times 1,000, which is 10,000 children right here. But when we render, you're going to have 100, which would be 100,000 children. Length, this allows you to just sort of tone down the length a little bit. I don't usually touch this because generally speaking, I like to just, if my hair is shorter, well then I like to actually sculpt my hair shorter. But this is helpful because this is keyframeable. So say you have a hair shrinking simulation, you can actually just keyframe this. You can keyframe the length to have it go from 1 to 0, and that way your hair actually grows or shrinks over time. So down here is where you're really getting into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of your children, right? The parting, the clumping, the roughness, and the kink tabs. These are really how your hair reacts or how they interact and what it looks like. And this is how you can really start to define the shape of your hair. So you want to have long flowing hair. Well, that's going to be different settings in the roughness tab and in the kink tab than if you want to make a frizzy afro. Moving on, that was a base level explanation of children, but that's going to be one of the most important tabs. Keep that in mind. Hair shape. This is a very important tab, and you probably only need to touch it once, right in the beginning. This is basically hey, how thick is my hair, and how thick is it at the base of my hair versus the tip of the hair. The strand shape basically says, okay, what's the interpolation? You can think of it like interpolation, right? So 0 is linear. So hair is not infinitely thin. You have to render it at some point. So it has to be in the 3D world, which means it needs actual depth, right? To render anything, it needs depth so we can get lighting on the hair. This tab is all about that. Currently, we have a diameter root of 1 and a tip of 0, which means we're looking at a cone, right? So your hair, on some level, is basically a triangle. If I were to increase this tip when I would render it, say it'd be 1, then you actually have a cube, right? Something that has depth at the top as well. Really just get creative with the shape of the actual follicle. Which brings me to this point, strand shape. This is saying the interpolation, right? If it's a 0, well, then we have what this is over here. It's just a straight line. But, you can change the shape to something like 1, and suddenly it's not a straight line anymore, but it becomes more like bullet shaped, right? It takes more of a parabolic approach to going to the end. Or if it's at -1, you start to get a shape more like this. So there's really these ways to craft the shape of your hair follicle, and that's exactly what this is, hair shape. Field weights, okay. This basically just says, how does your hair interact with any sort of field weight or force field you throw in the scene? If there's force, look at this, it's interacting with it. Whoa! And you don't need hair dynamics turned on to interact with that. Keep that in mind. And you can turn that down, say, I don't want it to interact with forces, right? And then maybe there's also a vortex in the scene, whatever that looks like. And there's also a harmonic in the scene. Harmonics do cool things too. But you have all these crazy force fields in the scene, and you don't want them to interact with anything, or you do. You can go through and change these. So, there was a force field, I think, I'll turn that off. And then there was a vortex, I think, I'll turn that off. There's so many field weights that you have to worry about and think. Say you don't want to deal with any of those. That's why you have this handy little all slider that says, turn them all off, right? I don't want to think about any force fields or gravity or anything. Just turn them all off. All right, force field settings. Generally speaking, on a beginner level, you don't have to deal with these. These basically deal with how does your hair interact with the force fields, and you can do fall offs. I don't fully know how this works. I generally stay out of the force field settings tab. This is advanced hair particle systems. It's not really in the scope of this tutorial. Vertex groups. All right, let's drop this down. Vertex groups are very helpful because they allow you to map out where you want your hair to be if you have a high poly mesh. So here in edit mode, let me just add some more details in. Subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. All right, if I add a new vertex group, and I'm gonna call it group because I am lazy, I will just grab the top here and I'll assign it all with a value, a weight of 1. It's important, keep that in mind. Vertex groups, you assign weight to them. Nothing's happened yet because I didn't apply anything, obviously. If I go into density, I can change this group. Right there, it is saying all the density, which is basically saying how much, where do I put all this hair? goes 100% to those and 0% to everything else. And we can skip the rest for now because textures I never use. That's another advanced one. Generally speaking, you also won't need to create any custom properties for the hair. So that's the base level of what all these do. So I'm going to load up a brand new Blender file right now. Okay, here I am in a brand new scene, and I am going to add, let's delete the default cube and let's add something fun. Let's add an icosphere because we're fun. Okay, I will add a new particle system and call it hair. And for the sake of this portion of the tutorial, we're going to do one follicle of hair. And the reason being, I want to go through the settings on one follicle of hair in a little more detail so we can see exactly what these settings are doing to one follicle of hair, so that way you know what they're doing to 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000. So that way you know what's happening to the children, specifically speaking, on each and every follicle of hair. So right now we have one follicle of hair. Let's get a little more in depth, right? You can change from object mode to particle edit, and you can just start using these tools up here to move things around and smooth them out and add hair and change the length and all that. But the first thing you'll notice is, man, this isn't very high detailed at all, right? So, okay, let's just do what we started with. I'm going to delete my edit so I can change these settings, and we'll give it more segments, right? That makes sense. I want to have more resolution, so let's do 12. I like using 12 for whatever reason. And I go back in here and I start doing it, and I quickly notice, well, that didn't do anything. I don't have any more hair. Well, okay, when you're editing the particles, you also have to change the display for the particle edit. It's crazy, but there's the options up here. Click there, and then change the path steps from 2. Just start increasing this number, and then suddenly you'll be getting more detail. And this makes sense because, of course, you want to limit how much detail you have while you're sculpting, so that way you can have real-time playback. So now I can sculpt this hair, and look at this. I have more resolution, and I've got the sculpt that I like. I'll go back into object mode, and suddenly my hair went back to normal. Well, don't fret, because again, there's another place that this exists. We have to just keep this in mind. It just exists in multiple places, and it's down here in our viewport display. We'll drop this down, and again, we have strand steps. We can just increase this number here. So now in our viewport display, we have maximum steps. All right, perfect. So we now increased our strand steps in the viewport, and we increased it in the particle edit mode. So when we're editing the particles, you can see it there. We have that set up. Let's just jump right in to children, okay? So like I said, I like to use the interpolated one. So I click here, and we now have all of these hair follicles all over the object, and they all are doing the same thing, but they're in different places. And that's what children are here. Basically, you just have duplicates of your strand of hair, and you can procedurally change the way they look, but not the way they move, because what the importance of children is that we're still doing one calculation, right? Even if I had 250 children here, if I turn on hair dynamics and I hit play, we're getting like a real-time playback. We're not dropping any frames. And that's because we're doing one calculation. These all move in the exact same way. And that's the power of children, is basically giving a lot more detail and pretty much just duplicating one particle and referencing it all over your object and calling them children. I'm going to keep my display amount down. I'll keep it at 50 for now. Parting, I don't really mess with parting ever. I don't really need it, so I just skip it. The important ones are these 3: clumping, roughness, and kink. We'll start from the top. Clumping. Clumping basically just says, hey, do you want all of the hair to clump together at some point? And this is saying 0, it doesn't clump at all, and +1 clumps at the tip of the hair, and -1 clumps at the base. It's very simple. That's what clumping does on one follicle of hair. This shape controls how it clumps. Similar to how the hair shape controlled the shape of the hair, you have the same thing. You can make the clump more parabolic, so it sort of it goes into it, or you can make it outward where it sort of like curls into it, right? So if you want to make a custom clump, you can just check this clump curve. And right now it's not doing anything because it's set for, it's at the very top where it's not clumping at all. And this one's at the very top, but it's also not clumping at all. So if you drag one down to the bottom, you're gonna get a clump at the bottom and you will get nothing at the top. You can clump at the top and the bottom by just dragging these both down, and suddenly they're connected at both the top and the bottom, and you have one strand, and you can pull it out in the middle, and now you have sort of like a jump rope. I mean, you can really customize this curve to just make the wildest clump. If you go into roughness, this is a nice one to use. If you turn up random, it slightly changes the shape of each hair, just slightly. And that's super helpful for doing characters or just doing any hair, because you don't want the hair to look too uniform. And right now they look very uniform. I would say you always want some level of random, and even if they're supposed to look very clean and straight, honestly, always give it a little bit, like that much, right? 0.07 or something, just that much is enough to do something. Because watch, if I clump all my hair, it looks like it's uniform, but it's actually not. You know, that's perfectly uniform, and it's just, it doesn't, I mean, you know, you can do what you want to do, but I like doing a little bit of random on some level because it just gives it more detail. Take this size and make it much smaller, and it's kind of like giving all this giving a lot of little noisy detail to the hair, and it's really cool because it just gives it this wild look to it. I'll turn my clumping up a little bit, and yeah, just so we can see what this is doing. So if I hit play, we're just looking through our hair. Very cool. This is what one strand of hair is doing. Let's jump down here into the kink, and the kink does basically controls how does hair move, right? Like, is your hair spirally? Is it braided? Is it wavy? Is it radial? Is it curly? Generally speaking, I like to use curl and wave because I just like the way they move. If I click curl, you can increase the amplitude and then increase the frequency, and you get your hair to start to curl. It's helpful if you look at it from frame 0. And if you turn down the amplitude, you know, you can just have a little more control over the curl of it. So let me just turn off these children for now. 1. I will also delete my edit just so you can see. Okay, so I have this one hair strand and there's no sculpt on it. If I turn the amplitude to 0 on the curl, we can see we have, again, a straight line. And the clumping actually affects the curl as well. So if I put clumping at 0, it's going to curl in a perfectly uniform way the whole way up. And amplitude and frequency matter. Think about this just like a math signal, right? You know, like a sine wave. What's my amplitude? It's how much is it going out, right? You don't want that much. What's the frequency doing? Like, how often does it curl? You know, these are parameters you can change. And the same thing goes for wave. If I select wave, this pretty much just does a 2D sine wave, not so much a curl, but just a going out. And you can change the frequency and the amplitude. But I guess the point is with just one strand of hair, with one follicle of hair, you're getting all of these unique hair strands that come out that you can use this noise here to make look a little different throughout. And you very quickly have something that looks like a bunch of different pieces of hair, but really it's just the same hair. Okay, so I mean, again, that's a long piece of hair, and I can just call this long strand, and I'll hide it. Let's make a new particle system, right? Another hair one. Again, I'll rename this one long. Look, another situation where you have like the name of the particle system, but also the name of the particle settings. Like, it's like, why can't it just be one thing? I don't know. But I guess, you know, redundancy helps sometimes. So here, let's call this one afro, right? So let's make something that resembles like an afro. First of all, I would probably add a subdivision surface modifier with level of 2, and I'll put it before all of these. So that way it's just sort of working off of all the data there. And I go back in here, and remember, this one, I have it turned off, the long strand, and I'll rename my afro. Okay, cool. So let me just turn down my hair length, and again, we're just going to go through all these things, and we're going to think about what does an afro look like, right? So I will, this is not a hair shading tutorial, but that will come next with actually doing character hair. But for now, I'm just going to work on some lighting here. And we're looking at all of these. We have a little spike ball right now, and that's what we should have. I'm going to shade this smooth. That's what we should have, right? I mean, we didn't do anything crazy. We just have this. We have these hair pieces that are, again, they're triangles. They're little cones popping out, and we want to alter these. So what are some things we have to do first? Well, the first thing, and we're not sculpting this right now, so I don't have to worry about the path steps up here, which is already set for 6 because we did that earlier. But I just want to focus here in the viewport display. So I want to make sure I have ample segments. So I'm going to turn these segments up to 12, even though we probably don't need that many because the hair is shorter. I'm just going to keep it there anyway. And I'm going to turn my strand steps up to 7 because that's maximum. If your PC can't handle 7, try something around 4 or 5. But 2 is just not enough. 7, just so I can see. And I like to make sure for the render, I check B-spline. And that just helps get a little smoother of a hair render. So it's time to start playing with these settings. So if I click on interpolated, we're now here in the children. And let's look through the render tab. What do we got? Okay, a big puff ball with 10,000 follicles of hair, right? Because I'm viewing 10, and the number is 1,000. And again, even though I'm in rendered view right now, we're still in the viewport display. So that means we have 10. We're displaying 10, even though it's rendered view. Whenever if I bring the camera here, right? If I give this a little render here, you'll see that there's a whole lot more there. And actually did the other hair as well. There's a whole lot more hair here because now there's 100,000 pieces there. Let me actually also turn off the render for that one. Okay, cool. So let's keep going here. So the first thing that's gonna just take this design far is just adding randomness to it. And suddenly, look at this. It's just cool. Like, it's very cool. We have just this hairy looking thing with the hair just curling all over the place. This will get you a long way, like from the start, just adding randomness to it. And that's a great starting place. But because it's afro, I want to do curly hair. So I'll go to the kink type, add curl, and you're going to see all this weirdness happening. When it's on such a small scale, you want to turn the amplitude way down to like 0.01, and then it's helpful to actually turn the random off so you see what you're working with at first. And now you can start to see that it's doing this. We want more frequency, so go from 2 to 8, and now we have all these curlies popping out. All right, let's do change the frequency to 5 for now, and then if I go back and I add randomness, we quickly have a curly, random little hairball here. So you can see that there's all sorts of ways to craft the shape of a hair particle system, and using these will help get you there. So in the next part, we're going to go through and we're actually going to use what we learned to create a hair system for a character and look into doing a little bit of hair sculpting. So thanks for watching. Drop any comments in the comment thing below, and subscribe. Take care.